Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf, which is Eruvin Daf Lamed Hey. We are 10 lines from the top of the Amud and discussing a case where a person placed the food for his Eruv into a large-sized closet, a migdal. So it's locked inside this closet with no key in sight. We have a Maseches now Mishnah. Rameya says this Eruv is valid because theoretically he has the ability to access the food which is in this migdal. Whereas Rabbi says, unless he has a key within reach, this Eruv is invalid because he has no access to the food within this locked closet. Says the Gemara 10 lines from the top. Rabba and Rav Yosef, the Amritavai, they both explained what is the basis of the Maseches in our Mishnah. So they explained as follows. We're speaking about a wooden closet. And what is the Maseches? The Mar Savar Kliyu. Rameir holds this large size migdal is classified as a utensil. And if it's a kli, then there's no halacha of binyan or soiser when it comes to a kli. Ve'en binyan bekelim, ve'en stir bekelim. There's no malachim in a Torah of building or demolishing when it involves a kli. Therefore, in Torah, he has full access to the food within this locked wooden closet. He simply breaks it open and accesses his food. Umar savar oilu. However, Rabbi Lezer maintains this large-sized closet is considered to be an oil, like a structure, and therefore he has no ability to access the food locked therein because he can't demolish it. That involves a malachim and a Torah of soiser. So the question is whether this large-sized migdal shleitz is classified as a kli, in which case he has access to the food inside, or it's classified as an oil, in which case he has no access to the food therein because it involves a malachim and a Torah of soiser. And if he has no access to the food, then that food therein cannot activate his Eruv. Says the Gemara, this Maseches is actually compatible with another Maseches Tanaim who seem to be arguing about this very point, whether this large size closet is classified as a kli or oil. This nan, or some have this sanya, we learned in the Brisa, hikish al gabe shida teva migdal. This is involving a zav. We know that a zav who moves something, he transfers tumah to that thing, even if he doesn't actually come into contact with it, if he's wearing a glove. That's called hesed hazav. It's an indirect interaction with the zav. So if he moves something, it becomes tummy. What if the zav banged on top of a shida, which is a large-size carriage, teva, a chest, a migdal, large-size closet, hikish al gabi, shida teva migdal, tmeim. So if you move them in this manner, they become tummy. This is the shita of Tanakam. Rab Nechemya, Rab Shimon Matar, they maintain that this large-sized chest remains tar. My love, shall we not say kamiflagi? This very question is actually the point of contention here. Ma savar kliyu. Tanakama holds that this large size structure, this large size closet, armor, carriage, is classified as a kli, and therefore, if it's moved by the zav, it becomes tamei. Umar savar oil. As opposed to Rab Nechemya and Rab Shimon, they hold this large size thing is called an oil. It's like a tent, like a structure, like a home, which cannot be makabel tumah. If the zav touches a home, it doesn't become tamei. Therefore, although the zav here moved the shida teva migdal, they're considered to be an oil, and they will not become tamei as a result. So what proposes that just as we find the Maseches in this brisa, whether this large size migdal is classified as a kli or oil pertaining to tumas zav, likewise this will be the very point of Maseches in our Mishnah, whether this migdal is called a kli, which allows one to break it to access the food therein, or it's called an oil, which prevents a person from demolishing it to access his food, and therefore the Eruv is inaccessible. Omra Abaye, you can't say this. If it's tisbra, can you really suggest that this question is the very point of contention in this Maseches here regarding the zav? That's actually not so. V'atanya, because haven't we learned in a different brayso? Oyel v'nisat tami. when something is an oil, a true oil, a tent, but it's transportable, meaning it was moved by the zav, oil vin nisat, it was moved by the zav, tamei, even though it's an oil. If it was moved, it becomes tamei, machmas, the hesed of the zav. Kli, ve'ein nisat tar. Conversely, if you have a kli, something which all agree is classified as a kli, it's a small size kli, but it was not actually moved by the zav. For instance, it was nailed into the ground, or it's too heavy that the zav cannot move it. Tar, all agree, there's no tumas hesed applicable to this type of kli. So the Brisa clearly tells us that it's unrelated to the classification of the item here. Even if something is considered an oil, but if it's been moved by the zav, if it can be moved, and it was moved, it's tamei. In contrast to a kli, where it's something which can't be moved, it's nailed into the ground, it's heavy. So this type of kli cannot have hesed hazav. So it's very clear that it has nothing to do with how we classify it. If it was moved by the zav, it's tamei. Otherwise, it's uktani sefer. And likewise, we actually learned in this sefer, the latter part of that previous brisa, discussing the machlokes between Tanakam and Nechemya, the brisa concludes by saying, "V'mahayu nisoitin tmein." Getting back to the Shida Teva Migdal, the brisa says, if they were actually moved by the zav, all agree that it's tamei. The brisa concludes, "Zaklal, this is your general rule of thumb. Nisad machmas koichet tamei." If the item was actually moved as a result of the direct koyach of the zav, he directly moved it, surely it's tamei. Whether it's an oil or whether it's a kli, machmas ra'ada toher. If the item moved not directly to the zav, rather as a result of ra'ada, a tremor, a quake. For instance, the zav stamped his foot on the ground next to this chest, and as a result of that bang, the chest quivered and shook. This thing is tar because it's a very indirect form of interaction with the zav. Rashi calls it koyach koychay. It's doubly removed from the zav. He banged the floor. The floor received that energy and created that tremor, which in turn shook this migdal. That's too indirect to be considered tumas hesed. So the Brisa sets forth a klal. If there's a direct movement, it's tamei. If it's very indirect movement, then it's tar. But in any case, we see that even this migdal would be tamei if it was moved directly by the zav. So apparently, there's no machlokes there in that Brisa between Tanakama and Nechemya, whether this migdal is classified like a kli and can have tuma by being moved by the zav, or classified as an oil and cannot receive tuma through being moved by the zav. The Brisa clearly tells us it's unrelated to the classification of the item. The pointer is one question: was it moved directly by the zav, in which case it's tamei; indirectly, in which case it's tar. So you can't say that the point of machlokes is whether this migdal is regarded as a kli or oil. It doesn't seem to have any relation to the machlokes discussed there. Says the Gemara Elamar Abaye, indeed, it's unrelated to that question. The question there is a different question: whether this migdal was actually moved by the zav. Meaning, whether it's a kli, whether it's an oil, if it's moved directly by the zav, it becomes tamei. So what is the question there? The Kuli Am all agree. Hesed machmas koichet tamei. If the kli or the oil was moved directly through the koyach of the zav, certainly it becomes tamei. That's agreed upon by all. Machmas ra'ada tar. If it merely was moved as a result of a tremor in the ground, the zav banged the floor, and that in turn shook and moved this item, all agree that's too far removed from the zav and it remains tar. So in both these scenarios, all agree regarding the halacha of this item. If it's a direct contact, a direct movement, it's tamei. If it's indirect movement, it's tar. So what then is the point of machlokes here? Says Abaye, v'hacha. You know what we're speaking about here? Bira'ada machmas koiche eskinan. It shook as a result of a direct koyach of the zav. So the zav banged the shida, he banged right on it, but it merely shook as a result of that bang. It was a ra'ada, it was a quake, a tremor. It didn't actually move out of its spot. So it was a direct tremor, which was applied to it by the zav. So the question here is this considered to be hesed hazav? If it shook but it didn't move out of its place, and this will be the machlekes. The Mar Savar have a hesed. Tanakama holds this as well is considered to be movement, and therefore it becomes tamid through the zav. Umar Savar love a hesed. However, the other Tanaim, Nechemia, Reb Shimon, they hold merely quaking and shivering and shaking is not considered to be hesed. It's not a drastic enough effect from the act of the zav, and is not included in the category of tumas hesed, and therefore it remains tar. Let's stop for a moment. So, regarding tumas hesed, the Gemara tells us the tumas hesed can apply to a kli or to an oil equally. There's no distinction between the two. The question is whether it moved or not. The Gemara gives us three categories. If it was hesed machmas koichai, meaning it actually moved out of its place as a result of a direct action of the zav, then it's tamei. If it was only hesed machmas ra'ada, if it moved as a result of a tremor, which was affected by the zav, he banged the floor near this item, which in turn caused this item to move out of its place, all agree that's too far removed from the act of the zav, and it remains tar. When there was a ra'ada machmas koichai, meaning the zav directly impacted this chayfetz, but it didn't remove out of its place. It was not removed out of its location. It simply shook and quivered. Then we have a machlekes. Is that considered to be hesed or not? So it has nothing to do with whether something is an oil or a kli, because all these halachas will apply equally to something which is a kli or something which is an oil. So getting back to our Mishnah here, we were exploring the pshat and the machlekes. When he has his food locked into this migdal, Rameir says it's accessible, Rabbi Lezer says it's not accessible. So initially the Gemara wanted to say, the machlekes is whether we classify this migdal as an oil, which prevents him from breaking it open, or we classify it as a kli, which allows him to get in there. And we said it's compatible with the machlekes regarding zav, but the Gemara discounted that approach, because apparently the discussion by Ziva is unrelated to this question, how to classify something, whether a kli or oil. So let's get back to our Mishnah. If so, if that's the case, how are we going to establish and interpret our Mishnah? Meaning, as Rashi explains, if we're speaking about a small size migdal, which cannot contain the amount of 40 sa, all agree it's a kli. And certainly, he should be able to break it open to get his food. If we're speaking about a large size migdal, which can contain 40 sa, all would agree it's classified as an oil. In which case, he would be prevented from breaking it open. So when does this machlekes apply? Says the Gemara, Abaye v'Rava, the Amr Tavai, they both explain as follows. Very simple machlekes. B'mino, b'manol, v'karta, b'misnaskinan. We're speaking about even a large size migdal, which is perhaps an oil. And it was closed up, it was locked up with a rope. That's how we locked up the migdal. Uboy sakina lemifsake, which requires a knife to cut it open. So in order to access his food, he needs to actually cut that rope open. The question is as follows. Can he bring a knife for this purpose? Tanakama Savar like Rabbi Yosi, Tanakama Rabbi Meir, who says his food is accessible because he was like Rabbi Yosi. The Amar, Kol HaKelim Etom B'Shabbos, all types of kelim can be moved on Shabbos. Chutz Mimasra Godel, a large, except for a large size saw, V'Yasser Shemachreisha, or this rod which was used as part of the plow. These things are delicate and designated for their specific malacha. It's called muktzah machmas chasar and kiss. A person wouldn't divert its use for other purposes due to its high value and its fact that it's delicate. But otherwise, a typical standard knife can be used to cut through a rope, and therefore he holds the food of the Erev is accessible. Rabbi Lezer Savak Rabbi Nechemia, He also Nechemia, who subscribes to a unique shita when it comes to muksa. The Amar, afilu talis, even a baguette, afilu tarvad, even a spoon, they can only be moved on Shabbos if he's moving it for the sake of its designated use. So he wants to wear the talis, sure, go ahead and carry it. If he wants to use a spoon to scoop something out, some food, sure. But to take a knife, which is designated primarily to be used for cutting meat, cutting bread, and use it to cut a rope, according to Nechemia, it's off limits for that purpose. He cannot be metaltled for that. Therefore, Rebbe Lezer holds he has no way to get his food, which requires a knife to cut the rope open to access the food. And therefore, he says the Erev is invalid because it's out of reach. Let's take a look at Rashi inside here. So Rashi here is towards the middle of the column, exactly 27 lines from the top of the Amud. Rashi begins with Umas Nisan. So we're coming to interpret our Mishnah. Umas Nisan the Erev V'mayma Kminila. How are we going to establish it? How are we going to explain it? The L'kuliyam all agree. If Gadalhu, if this migdal is large in size, Oyalu. V'may Eruv Erev. Why is it called an Erev? Because if it's an oil, he has no access to it. He can't break it. It involves a malach of Seiser. Katan, if it's a small size migdal, she'ein machzik mem sa belach, doesn't contain 40 sa. Kliu, all agree it's regarded as a kli, and he can break it open to get his food. Umay tamid Rebbe Lezer. And what will be the reason of Rebbe Lezer, who considers the food locked inside this migdal as out of reach? Says the Merkater Remisna was speaking about this migdal, which was tied up with a rope. Kasher hamanul bechebel uboy sakin al mipsake, and a knife is required to cut it open. Says Rashi, do you have a matzil mipsake biyadei? Because if he can merely use his hands, he can manually open up this lock. Shaper dami, I feel Rebbe Lezer will be fine even contra Rebbe Lezer. Dei chaticha asur el b'mechuber, because the isur chaticha malacha would only apply cutting away from something. Mechuber, perhaps Rashi means something which is connected to the ground. So he's pulling something off. He's cutting something off from something else, whether connected to the ground or whether he's chopping something off from something else. Here, he's not cutting a piece. He's not slicing something from a larger piece. He's merely destroying something. He's breaking apart this lock. He's cutting open the rope. He's destroying it. Vishoring, that's mutter. The kelim which are sealed, matir, he can untie, mafkia, and rav, v'choytechen, katan. V'avagav the whole oil. Ask Rashi Akash. Perhaps we're speaking about a migdal which is large in size, which is an oil. And the Gemara tells us there, he cannot cut open the seal of something which is in the ground. So how can he go ahead and cut open the lock, the rope of the oil, which is considered to be like a structure? Says Rashi, it's only Gzera d'Rabbanan here. The Maseches Eruvin. That limitation is only a d'Rabbanan, because it appears like he's demolishing. Because he's not really doing Seiser. He's merely opening a doorway, an entranceway. He's breaking this thing to get the thing open. So it's only d'Rabbanan. So although we're speaking about oil, there's no malacha d'oraisa here. And as we know, we discussed this a number of times, since it's only Issa d'Rabbanan Shvus, that won't apply ben hashmashes, which is the moment when the Erev needs to take effect. So since at that moment he has full access to the food inside this locked migdal, the Erev has been activated. So this is the Shita, going back to the Shita of Rav Meir, who says that even a knife can be employed to break open this migdal. Whereas according to Rebbe Lezer, if he can use his hands, that will be fine, as Rashi just explained. The problem here is that he needs a knife. And Rebbe Lezer follows Rebbe Nechemia's Shita that a knife can only be used for the sake of its designated purpose. What is the primary use of a knife? It's not meant to be used to cut ropes. Bread and meat. And in summation, this is the machlekes. This is the pshat of the machlekes between the Tanakama and Rebbe Lezer. Tanakama less the Yirmiyah. He does not hold the Yirmiyah's limitation. He holds this Erev is fine. The pasuk leila misna, because he can simply cut through the rope using a knife. Rebbe Lezer says no, he can't cut through the rope with a knife. Therefore, he says like this: if he has access to the key, then he's fine. But otherwise, this Erev is inaccessible. Rav Lezer, I mean, im be'ir avad, here is the Erev. If the key is in the city, then it's fine. The chimat kli ma'isle der kafifas, because he can go ahead and find the key and bring it through those storage areas, as we discussed in the previous blot. So he has access to that key, and he can go ahead and open this migdal. But if he lost the key out in the field, in which case he can't transport that key over to the migdal, then the food in the migdal is considered to be out of reach. The mifsik manu loimatzi k'nechemya, because he cannot go ahead and chop that rope, open the manu, because Lezer follows Rav Nechemya's shita that a knife cannot be used for this purpose. So in summary, the halacha of the Mishnah is as follows: when he has the food locked into this migdal without a key inside, according to Tanakam, it's okay because he can open up the ropes by cutting through with a knife. Which Rav Lezer holds a knife cannot be used for this purpose. The Erev is inaccessible and therefore ineffective. Continues the Mishnah. So the person placed his Erev food at the Erev site. So generally, one would place it 2,000 amis away from his home in order to maximize the benefit of the Erev. So he has his home, and 2,000 amis away he would place the Erev, which becomes his new Shabbos residence, which allows him to walk from there an additional 2,000 amis. So what happens if a person places his Erev at the end of the Tchum, meaning at or around 2,000 amis from his home, and his Gagel Chutz Tchum, a wind came along and blew it away, it rolled out of the Tchum. In this case, the Erev is ineffective. Why? Explains Rashi, because it's too far away from him. At the point of Ben Hashmoshes, where is this fellow? Where is he? He's sitting in his home, which is right now further, more than 2,000 amis from his food, because it rolled out of the Tchum boundary. It's now 2,000 amis and 10 amis away from his home. So he's too far from that food. He can't access it during Ben Hashmoshes, and therefore that Erev cannot take effect. That's one example. Another example of a problematic Erev is Nafal of Gal. A pile of stones fell onto the Erev, making it inaccessible. Or Nisraf, or it got burned. Or Truma of an Itmis, or it was Truma and became Tummy, in which case it's inedible for all. So it depends when this happened. If it happened still during daytime, before the Ben Hashmoshes, Eini Erev. This Erev doesn't work because it wasn't present during the time of Ben Hashmoshes, when the Erev is meant to be implemented. Mishach HaShecha, but if it happened after nightfall, how is the Erev? In this case it works. Why? Let's take a look at Rashi inside. So, with the lines of Rashi widen at the bottom of the Amid, let's take a look 3 lines above that. Mishach HaShecha, says Rashi, if it happened when it was already dark, then it's okay. Kvar Kana Erev, Ben Hashmoshes. The Erev has already acquired, has already generated the Malkam Shvisa. Shabbos, Hoyel v'Hutru Hutru. Once Shabbos had already received the heter from the Erev, once the Erev had already been established and implemented, that heter of the Erev maintains itself throughout the entire Shabbos, even if the Erev disappeared, sometimes through Shabbos. So again, if the Erev was destroyed prior to nightfall, the Erev doesn't work. If it happened after Chashecha, then it's fine. Continues the Mishnah. What if there's a suffix, im suffix? We don't know when it happened. If it happened prior to Ben Hashmoshes, in which case the Erev is not Chal, doesn't take effect, or it happened later, after Ben Hashmoshes, in which case the Erev is valid. So we have an uncertainty. We can't assume that this Erev was safe and present at the location. He's a confused fellow. He's in limbo. He's a chamar gamal. What does that mean? He must approach the situation, stringently, assuming perhaps the Erev was not there during Ben Hashmoshes. So, if he had a home and placed the Erev 2,000 amas away, so you have a suffix. If the Erev was there during Ben Hashmoshes, so this allows him to walk 2,000 amas in this direction, 2,000 amas in the other direction, and that's fine. If the Erev was not the during Hashmashis, so the Shvisa was really in his original home, because the Erev wasn't there. And this allows him to walk 2,000 amas in this direction, 2,000 amas in the other direction. So one thing's for sure, the space, the area between his home and the Erev is fully permissible. Either way, whether the home was a Shabbos residence or the Erev was a Shabbos residence, that allows him to walk in this area, 2,000 amas between the home and the Erev. So this location is fine. This area is perfectly mutter. However, he cannot walk in the other direction. Meaning, there's one side of the coin which says, well, perhaps the Erev was implemented, was there during Ben Hashmashos, which allows him to walk in that direction as well, past the Erev. But on the other hand, perhaps the Erev was not there during Ben Hashmashos, which results in his home being considered his true Shabbos residence, which doesn't allow him to walk past that Erev. It only allows him to walk 2,000 amas this way, 2,000 amas the other way. So again, between the Erev and his home, he certainly can walk. But anywhere in the other direction from his home the other way, and from the Erev in this direction, in this case, is a suffix. He cannot use that area. He's a chamor gamel. He's in limbo. Rashi says it's like a person who's leading a donkey, who runs ahead, and at the same time trying to lead a camel, who's lagging lazily behind. So he's stuck in the middle, being pulled in both directions. This person can't assume that his house is the Makom Shvisa, which allows him to walk in the other direction. Can't assume that the Erev created his Makom Shvisa, which allows him to walk past the Erev in the other direction. The only place which he's allowed to use is the area between the home and the Erev, and that's Mimanoshach, because either way, that area is mutter. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, we can't just assume in a situation of suffix that the Erev certainly was there, because when he placed it there, it was fine, it was healthy, it was tar, it wasn't burnt. Perhaps we should say, well, let's apply chazaka. When he placed it there, it was present. Let's assume that status continued at least throughout Ben Hashmashos. We don't say that. We go l'chumra and we say, well, we're not sure whether or not the Erev was present, was valid during Ben Hashmashos, and he cannot rely on the Erev. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Oimrim, suffix Erev kasher. When there's a suffix regarding the validity of the Erev, we can be mekel and we could say, yeah, let's assume that the Erev, since when he placed it there, it was fine. Let's assume that situation, that status continued. The Chazaka tells us to keep the Erev in place. Let's assume it was present during Ben Hashmashos. So although now it's been burnt up, but that happened recently. During Ben Hashmashos, we presume that it was there, and therefore he can rely on the Erev to walk past the Tchum. Rabbi Yossi, I'll prove it. Av Tumas, that was his name. Heyid Mishum Chamishas Kenim, he testified the name of 5 elderly Talmid Chachamim. Al Safek Erev Shekasher. When we have a suffix regarding Erev, we follow the lenient approach and we assume that the Erev is kosher. Continues the Gemara. Nisgalgo Chutz L'Tchum, that was the first case in the Mishnah. The Erev rolled out past the Tchum, in which case the Erev is too far from him, and therefore is not kosher. Amar Rabba Leishano, this is only a concern Elosh Nisgalgo Chutz L'Arba Amis. If it rolled past 4 amas of the Tchum, so you have the Tchum, and the Erev rolled away more than 4 amas from the Tchum, in which case it's out of bounds, it's inaccessible to him. But if the Erev rolled, but it's still within 4 amas of the Tchum, let's say you have the Tchum, and the Erev is only 3 amas outside the Tchum, that's fine. Why is it fine? Because whenever a person places an Erev at a certain location, that becomes his residence, that becomes his Makom Shvisa. It's like his home. We regard it like it was just a Yachid status. So although it's not enclosed with Mechitzas, but it's considered to be his personal space, his personal residence. And that encompasses an area of 4 amas, which are considered to be one and the same entity. It's one usage area, it's one residence. Says Rava, if that's the case, so even if the Erev rolled out of the Tchum and it's within 4 amas, then what happens is that the Erev creates a Makom Shvisa, like a home, like Rosh Hashanah, within that area of 4 amas. And since it's only 3 amas out of the tchum, so the 4 amas actually extends back into the tchum. And we view the Erev as though it's still inside the tchum. And if it's in the tchum, then it's fine. Continues the Gemara, Nafal of Gal. This was the next case in the Mishnah. So a pile of stones descended on his Erev. Because the Gemara figures at this point that he can simply remove those stones manually. It's only a question of muktzah. Because if he would like, he can manually remove those stones. So what's the problem? The stones are muktzah. And since the only way he has access to his Erev is by doing muktzah, which is Rabbanan, so since during Ben Hashmashes, he didn't really have access to his food because it involves muktzah, that's why the Erev is ineffective. Says the Gemara, Leima Masisim like Rebbe? Shall we say that our Mishnah is not following Rebbe's Shita? The Ikar Rebbe, because otherwise Rebbe holds, Ha'amar kol davar shom shvus, like Gazral ben Hashmashes. The Issa Rabbanan of Shvus doesn't apply ben Hashmashes. So since this situation only involves a muktzah, which is only Issa Rabbanan, that won't apply ben Hashmashes, which is the point in time when the Erev is implemented. So why wouldn't it work? Why won't we consider him to have full access to his Erev? It says Mafilo Teima ke Rebbe. Even if you'll say that our mission is following Rebbe like Tzricha, apparently we're speaking about a case, the boy marvachatzina. He can't simply manually remove those stones. They're embedded, they're absorbed, they're sunken. He needs to have marvachatzina, these tools, a shovel, an axe, to unearth those stones, which is considered to be a malachim and atur, chayfer. Therefore, that prevents access to the Erev. It's malachim and atur. And since the only way he has access to his Erev during Ben Hashmashes is by doing a malachim and a Torah, that Erev is considered to be inaccessible and ineffective. Says the Gemara Tzrichi, why does the Mishnah need to begin with 2 cases? The Erev rolled out of the Tchum, so due to its location, and the next case, it was covered by stones due to the fact that it's inaccessible. Why does the Mishnah need to describe for us 2 similar situations? In both cases, the Erev is invalid. Why is that needed? The Tanan is Galgap, the Mishnah will only speak about the Erev which rolled out of the Tchum. I would say, yeah, that's no good. Mishum de Lesa Gabe, because it's not here. It's out of bounds. It's inaccessible. Aval Nafal of Gal. However, in the case where the Gal fell on the Erev, the Issa Gabe, it's still within reach. It's still within the Tchum. It's simply being blocked over. Aim will have the Erev, perhaps, in that case, it's a fine Erev. Therefore, the Mishnah needs to describe that case as well. Be Tanan Nafal of Gal. If the Mishnah will only cite the second case, I would say, well, that's really at a disadvantage. Because it's covered over and it's inaccessible. And therefore it doesn't work. But if the Erev is really here, it rolled out of the Tchum, perhaps in that case I consider it to be valid. Because Zimnan the Ase Zika, perhaps sometimes a wind will come by, and roll it back in. Therefore, I consider that to be a proper Erev. Erev, perhaps, due to that reason, we should consider this to be a proper Erev. Tzricha, therefore, the Mishnah needs to cite both examples. Both types of deficiencies. One rolled out of the Tchum due to its location, and one covered up by those stones due to its inaccessibility. Says the Gemara, Oy Nisraf, Truma Vitmis. We have another 2 cases. The Erev was burnt, or was truma that became tamei. Why does the Mishnah find it necessary to describe these additional 2 scenarios? Says the Gemara, Tana Nisraf, the reason why the Mishnah speaks about the burnt Erev, that highlights the extent of Rabbi Yosef's shita. Even if it's totally burnt up, it's incinerated, it's not around. Rabbi Yosef nevertheless maintains that we assume this Erev was here at the right moment during Ben Hashmashes. So that's why the Mishnah describes this case as well. It's a chiddush. Tana, Truma v'nitmis. Why does the Mishnah mention the case of Truma which became Tamei? This highlights the sheet of Rav Meir. Meaning, even though the Truma is right here, it just became Tamei. Perhaps that will be reason to apply a chazaka. You have something here in front of you. Let's say this thing that's here has a chazaka, a presumption that it was a proper Erev during the Ben Hashmashes, because when he placed the Truma there on Friday, it was tar. Let's assume that situation, that status, continued continuously through the Ben Hashmashes. So Rameir's chiddush is that even in this case, No, we go l'chumra. As the Gemara will soon explain for us why we go l'chumra involves a din ha-Torah. Therefore, we're meant to follow l'chumra, and we don't follow the chazak. Let's take a look at Rashi inside the top line. So the case of the burnt Erev highlights Rabbi Yosef's chiddush. Even though it's not present any longer. Loi mitzvah doesn't become asr. We assume that it was here during Ben Hashmashos. The case where the truma was burnt, that teaches us the extent of Rabbi Meir's shita. The avka of the yesh ba'olim, even though it's present, it's here. There's room to think, there's reason to believe. Hamidan of Ben Hashmasha is al chaskasa. Let's assume that during the Ben Hashmasha's point, the chazaka can be applied because prior to Ben Hashmasha's, this truma was tar. Let's assume that during Ben Hashmasha's as well, it maintained that status and was still tar. Even so, we don't say. Contrary, we don't apply a chazaka, which results in a leniency. Continues the Gemara on the second line. Indeed, does Rameya hold that when we have the suffix, whether the Eruv was around, the Eruv was tamei, then we go l'chumra, we say, we can't rely on the chazaka, just because when he placed it there, it was fine. Let's assume that status continued throughout Ben Hashmashos, and the Erev was present, the Erev wasn't tamei. Is that the case? We seem to have a Mishnah that indicates to us otherwise. We have a suffix when something is tamei. Rameh tells us we can follow the chazaka even if it results in a leniency. Says the Gemara of Atnan, haven't we learned in the Mishnah? Tamei shiar litval, a person who was tamei who went down to the mikveh to be tavel. Now, there was a suffix that resulted from this experience. Suffix tavel, suffix loy tavel. He has a suffix whether or not he was tavel. Or another case, afilu tavel, or let's say he knows that he was tavel, but suffix tavel bar sa, he doesn't know whether the mikveh contained the proper amount of 40 sa. Suffix loy tavel bar sa, whether the mikveh did not have bar sa. He doesn't know whether his tefillah was valid. Was he tavel in 40 or not? Or another case, we have two mikvahs in front of him. Ba'achas yesh bar sa, one contained 40 sa, ba'achas ein bar sa, the other one did not contain 40 sa. But tavel ba'achas he knows he went to one of them. Ve'en yodeh be'ezmen tavel, he's not sure which one he used. Sfeikai tamei. This situation is a suffix, and he remains tamei. But when is this said? Betuma chamura. When it involves a stringent tumah. Rashi explains, he was tamei, a tumah da'iraisa. Aval b'tumah kala. Well, let's say this person was tamei, only a lenient tumah, only a tumah d'Rabbanan. Kigoyin she'achal oichlin tmeim. For instance, he ate tamei foods. V'shasa mashkim tmeim. He drank tamei drinks. Or another two examples of a tumah d'Rabbanan. V'haba roishe b'ruba yimayim shuvin. Or his head and most of his body entered mayim shuvin, drawn water. Oishe naflu. Al roishe v'al ruba yimayim shleishe lugim mayim shuvin. Or 3 lugim mayim shuvin were poured on this person's head and most of his body. So these are all different types of tumas d'Rabbanan, as discussed in the beginning of Maseches Shabbos. This fellow wants to free himself of this tumah. V'yard litval, he went down to be tavel, and his suffix was generated by this experience. Suffix tavel, suffix loy tavel. He's uncertain of whether he was tavel, or in a case where he knows he was tavel, but there was a suffix as to the quantity of the water in the mikveh. Suffix tavel by sa. He doesn't know whether he was tavel in 40 sa, suffix loy tavel by sa, or he did not. Or if he had a choice of 2 mikvahs and he went into one of them. Ba'achas yesh bar sa, one of them contained 40 sa, and the other one didn't. Ba'achas ein bar sa. V'tavel ba'achas man, he was tavel in one of them. Ve'eino yodeh be'ezmen tavel, and he's uncertain which one was the mikvah that he immersed in. Sfeikai tahar. In all these situations, we say that the suffix has a din of tahara because it's a suffix tumah d'Rabbanan. Rabbi Yossi mitame, even in this case, he holds that it's tamei. So in any case, we have a kasha from this Mishnah, which is a stam Mishnah, an anonymous Mishnah, which is presumed to be Rav Meir, where Rav Meir tells us that a suffix tumah, in the case of a tumah d'Rabbanan, we go l'kula, we say it's tar. This is in contrast with the halacha in our Mishnah, where Rav Meir tells us when we have a suffix as to the status of the Eruv, we go l'chumra. The Gemara assumes at this point that the Eruv is only d'Rabbanan. So why should we go l'chumra? Says the Gemara, Rav Rameya holds that the Isser of Tchumen, leaving the boundaries, and subsequently the placement of the Erev, which allows one to go past the Tchum, is a Din D'Oraisa. It's Isser D'Oraisa that's involved here. And therefore, when there's a suffix in this context, we must call the Chumrah, as Rashi says, Sfeika D'Oraisa l'Chumrah. Therefore, Rameya maintains that we can't rely on this Erev, which is a suffix Erev, as opposed to the Mishnah, which is discussing, in the second part of the Mishnah, discussing a suffix, Tumah D'Rabbanan. Certainly in that case we go l'Kul. Says the Gemara, V'savar Rameya Tchumen D'Oraisu? Does Rameya really hold that Tchumen is D'Oraisa? Tanam. We have a Mishnah which seems to indicate otherwise. The Mishnah here is describing the manner in which they would calculate, they would measure the boundaries outside the city. So they would use a rope which was 50 amas long, and they would measure in increments of 50 amas. Now what happens if they reach a steep mountain or a deep canyon? The Mishnah tells us there's no need for them to actually measure the surface area of that steep mountain or deep canyon. If this canyon can be swallowed into the 50 amma rope, so you have a person standing on either side of the canyon holding that 50 amma rope, and the canyon fits into that 50 ammas, and you can just measure it right on top without actually entering the canyon and measuring the very surface of the canyon. Likewise with a mountain. So if it can be swallowed within this 50 ammas, you're okay. The Mishnah says, but if the canyon is too wide, the mountain is too wide, he can't swallow it into the 50 amma rope. So what does he do then? Bezu, in this case, Amar Rabbi Distai, Bar Yanai, Mishum Rameya. So he said, name of Rameya, Shamati, I heard from my teachers, my Rebbeim. What method is employed here? Shamati Shemekadrin Beharim. We bore through the mountain. Now, we don't literally mean we drill through the mountain. Rashi explains that we employ a method as follows. We only calculate the horizontal angle of this mountain. So they take a small size rope, 4 amas in length, held by 2 people, and they hold it just about horizontally, and they make their way up the mountain, measuring 4 amas at a time. So in this case, they're not really calculating the actual slope, the actual surface space of that mountain, which will result in a much larger calculation. Rather, they go up and down the mountain using this small rope, which really results in them calculating just about the horizontal angle only. So this is actually a kula, leniency, because if they would measure the actual mountain, it would result in a greater share. So this is the term called mekadrin b'harim. It's as though they're boring through the mountain, meaning it's as though they're measuring, calculating with a straight line through the mountain, not taking into account the slope. Shomati shemekadrin b'harim. Now this is a leniency applied to measuring, to calculating the share of tchum. This doesn't apply to a measurement which is required min HaTorah, as the Gemara will explain. Now, if you maintain the Rameya holds that the concept of tchumen is based on D'Oraisa, min mekadrin, can we employ this method of calculation? We're not meant to do so by D'Oraisa. V'omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rav Bravua, he told us as follows: Ein mekadrin. We don't employ this lenient method of calculation. Loi b'orei miklat. Not when it pertains to halachas min HaTorah. For instance, the orei miklat, which were these cities to which a person who killed somebody b'shogeg would run for protection. Not only the city itself affords protection, but even the municipal boundaries, the tchum around the cities, are for protection. So when they calculate, they measure the tchum, they can't employ this lenient method of mekadrin. B'loi be'egla rufa, nor when it comes to calculating the distance between the city and this person who they found dead. So the city closest to that person is required to bring a korban for kapara, the egla rufa, the calf which was killed. So the city closest, how is it measured? You cannot measure using this method of mekadrin. These are calculations of Torah. So apparently, if the Mishnah allows us to employ this method when it comes to Tchumei Shabbos, this proves to us that din of Tchum is not Torah. So how can you tell us that Rav Meir holds a Tchum D'Oraisa and therefore it goes to Chum? It says Malay Kasha. The Torah is very simple. Hadi Day. Rav Meir himself personally holds Tchum D'Oraisa, therefore he goes to Chum. Hadi Rabbe. This halacha mentioned in the Mishnah, the name of Reb Meir, was not actually his personal shita. It was the name of his Rebbe. Deikanami. Because if you pay close attention to the wording of the Mishnah, it is indicative of such. Because the Mishnah says, Diktani, Bezu Amar Abdistai Rab Yaneh, Mishnah Reb Meir. He quoted Reb Meir, Shamati. Reb Meir says, I heard, meaning I heard from my Rebbe. Shemakadim Baharim. We employ this form of measurement through the mountains when it pertains to Tchumen. So it was his Rebbe's opinion. Who holds that Tchumen is Midrabanan? Shma Mina, indeed, this is a raya. That it was only his Rebbe's shita, but he himself holds that Tchumen Adaraisa. And therefore, he goes L'chum. So in summary, the Mishnah gave us 4 examples where the Erev is not valid. If the Erev rolled out of the Tchum, the Gemara tells us, it was past 4 amis. If a gal of stones fell on it, where he needs to do it with using a tool, which involves a malacha, or got burnt, or the truma became tamei. So if it happened during daylight time, the Erev is invalid. If it happened at night, then it's fine. If there's a suffix, Reb Meir holds that Tchumen Aminat Torah, he holds it's possible because we go to Chumrah. Rabbi Yossi apparently holds Tchumen Amili D'Rabbanan, therefore he holds that we go leniently, and the Erev is kosher. Continues the Gemara. So at this point, Reb Meir will hold that something which involves a din Torah would not allow us to follow the Chazakah. Therefore, the Erev, which has a suffix of whether or not it was Tameh during Ben Hashmashes, we will consider it to be Tameh. We can't say, well, since when he placed the Erev there it was Torah, let's assume that situation maintained itself throughout Ben Hashmashes. Let's follow that Chazakah. No, according to Reb Meir, since it is in Torah, we say Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, and we can't assume this Erev is valid. Says V'Rami D'Oraisa D'Oraisa L'Reb Meir. We have an apparent contradiction between this case of a Safek D'Oraisa where Reb Meir goes L'Chumra, it doesn't follow the Chazakah, in contrast to another Mishnah which involves a Chazakah. In the case of D'Oraisa, Reb Meir does follow the Chazakah, and he maintains that the person is tar based on Chazakah. V'Rami D'Oraisa D'Oraisa L'Reb Meir. This is not as we learned in the Mishnah. Naka be'echad b'layla. If a person came into contact with another person in the darkness of night, and he was unaware of whether that person was alive or dead at that moment, and if he's a mace, he is mitzame, the person that touched him. So there's a suffix there. Ulemachar, and tomorrow, hishkim umatzames. He got up and found this person to be a mace. So now we have 2 conflicting considerations. On the one hand, we have a chazakah, that everything's fine because this person was seen alive yesterday. So let's perhaps assume that situation maintained itself throughout the night, and therefore this person who touched him is tar. On the other hand, in the present moment in time, this person is a mace. Let's assume that this situation began already last night. So we have 2 conflicting considerations. Which one do we follow? Reb Meir Matar, he says this person is tar. We follow the original chazakah. This person was seen alive yesterday. Let's assume he was alive at the point of contact. They say this person is tameh. Shekol hatumais keshas metziyasan. Tumah is meant to be dealt with according to the present moment. If it's tameh now, let's assume retroactively this situation was present during the nighttime as well, and therefore when he touched him, this person was already mace. So we see that Reb Meir follows chazakah, and he maintains that this person is tar, despite the fact that we're speaking about a suffix tumah d'oraisa. This is in contrast with our Mishnah, where he doesn't follow the chazakah. Omer Rabbi Yirmiyah, generally speaking, Reb Meir does follow chazakah. However, our Mishnah is speaking about a unique case. Mishnah Seinu, Shahayo Leo Sheretz Kol Ben Hashmashes, speaking about that the sheretz, this mouse, which is Metame, the Truma, was present on the Truma the entire Ben Hashmashes. So there's no suffix here. It's a vadai that this Erev is invalid. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, Ihachi. If so, Bahal Lemer Rabbi Yossi, suffix Erev kosher. Would Rabbi Yossi say that it's a suffix Erev and it's kosher? It's a vadai tameh. Says, well, no. That's not what Rabbi Yirmiyah meant. Rabba, Rabbi Yossi, Damri Tavayu. They both explained this is what Rabbi Yirmiyah meant to say. In the case of Erev, we're speaking about where there are 2 kitayim, 2 groups of witnesses who are offering conflicting testimonies, conflicting accounts as to what exactly happened with that Erev. One group is saying, became tamei by day, in which case the Erev is not kosher. The other group is saying, well, this Erev became tamei at night, after Ben Hashmashes. In this case, Reb Meir holds, we can't follow the chazakah. We can't say, well, since initially the Truma was tar. Let's assume it maintained that status throughout Ben Hashmashas, because we have two Edom who are opposing, who are giving us an account which opposes that Chazaka. Therefore, we're meant to follow the Chumrah, since it pertains to it didn't have Torah. In contrast to the Mishnah, where the person touched somebody in the middle of the night, there are no Edom there. There are no testimonies which are conflicting, which are opposing the Chazaka. Therefore, in that case, certainly follow the Chazaka, even according to Rameir. We say, since this person was seen alive yesterday, let's assume safely that this person was still alive during the night when this person touched him. And therefore, we say he's tar. Continues the Gemara. Rav Amar. Rav agrees to this concept, but just adds one more point. Even if we say that the story of Noga Bechad Balayla, when he touched that person in the middle of the night, unsure whether he was alive or dead, is speaking about a similar case. So we had two Edom, two Kitei Edom, two groups of witnesses who are offering conflicting accounts as to what happened. Even in that case, Rameir will hold that this person is tar. We follow the Chazaka. Why? Hasam Trei Chazaka Lekula. Because over there we have two Chazakas Lekula to this person's benefit. Number one, this person was seen alive yesterday. Let's assume he was alive throughout the night. Number two, the person who touched him has his own personal chazaka. He was tar prior to that experience. Let's assume that chazaka, that situation, maintained itself. So since we have a double chazaka, we can follow that even when it's opposed by those Edom. In contrast to our Mishnah, in contrast to our Mishnah, we only have one chazaka l'kula. We have the chazaka which says, well, initially the truma was tar prior to Ben Hashmashis. Let's assume it maintained that status through Ben Hashmashis. But since it's being opposed by the testimony of those Edom, Rameir maintains you can't follow the chazaka. So in summary, we have a Safek Tumah according to Rameir. If it involves only a Tumah d'Rabbanan, Rameir holds he's tar. When it involves a Tumah d'Oraisa, so generally we follow the chazaka. There's a Cheskas Tumah, and he's Tameh. If the Cheskas Tahara is tar. But if there's a Cheskas Tahara which is opposed by one of those two groups of Edom, in this case we can't follow the Chazaka, and he's Tameh. However, when we have two Chazakas which oppose those Edom, in this case even Rameir agrees that he's tar. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. The Gemara began by explaining the case where he locked his food in the Migdal. Rameir says it's okay because he can access it by using a knife to cut through those ropes. Which Rebbe holds, a knife cannot be used for this purpose, and therefore the Erev is inaccessible and ineffective. We discussed 4 cases where the Erev is invalid. It rolled out of the Tchum, was covered by a pile of stones. It got burnt, or the Tchum became Tameh. So if it happened prior to Ben Hashmashis, it doesn't work. If it happened at night, then it's fine. If there's a suffix, Rameir maintains, since Tchumen is the Iraisa, we can't follow the Chazaka here, and we say the Erev is puzzle. Whereas Rabbi Yossi holds Tchumen is the Rabbanan, and therefore the suffix Erev is Kasha. And the Gemara concludes, although generally Rameir follows Chazaka, but in the case of the Erev, since there are two Edom who are testifying against that Chazaka, therefore we can't rely on the Chazaka, and we say suffix Erev is puzzle.